Warning, this video will help you catch your biggest ever carp. We all love landing a big carp, and catching a PB or personal best is probably the most memorable thing someone like you or I can do. So in this video, I'm going to run through how I went about breaking my personal best at this beautiful lake in France and give you all the tips and advice I have to make the most of your first fishing trip out in France. But how exactly do you go about catching the really big ones? Well, first of all, you've got to be fishing the right place. There's lots of lakes across Europe that simply don't hold big carp. I'm in France right now, and France is probably the country in Europe that contains the highest number of giant fish. What I mean is that back home in England, a lot of the lakes that I fish, the biggest carp in the lake might be 25 pounds, 30, maybe even 40 pounds. But out here in France, there are countless waters with carp in excess of 50, 60, 70 pounds or even more. But it's not just the stocks of big carp that draw people to France, it's also the convenience. It's quite easy to get here. You don't have to take a plane, you don't have to worry about transporting your gear, just load up your car or van, drive to the ferry or Eurotunnel, and in 45 minutes, you'll be there. You're in France. The carp angling in France is also quite well documented. There's loads and loads of YouTube videos of people targeting specific waters, plenty of English spoken content that will help instruct you and guide you as to where to go so you can replicate other people's success. And there's also a load of websites dedicated to helping you find waters in France and go about catching fish. It's not like you're heading into the pure unknown, unless that's what you want. There's two types of sort of waters that you can choose from in France. There's private places, like where I am today, where you pay to fish, or there's public waters where you kind of just rock up and find your own way. You know, there's no one there to greet you, there's no bailiff, there's nothing like that. It's you versus the fish. My personal opinion is fishing a public water is tougher, it's harder on the body, and it's also more risky. If you're an experienced angler who loves a challenge, I would drive out into Europe and explore the many rivers, giant reservoirs, canals and lakes that France has to offer. However, if you're getting into fishing and maybe you haven't done it for as long and this is your first time fishing in France, you're probably best off booking up a dedicated fishery. A commercial fishery where you pay to fish for, let's say, a week at a time is convenient. There's often someone on site who speaks English who can help you out. There's often people around who can sell you bait and provide you tackle. Maybe you can even borrow equipment if you don't have it. Where I'm fishing at the moment, we've even got lodges to sleep in and a cooker and all sorts. It's quite luxurious, to be honest. But France has a sliding scale from luxury convenient carp fishing all the way through to just drive and survive and see how it goes on one of the public inland seas. It's also important to point out that if you choose to fish a private water, a commercial fishery, you won't need to buy a French fishing license. But if you want to fish public water, so that's somewhere that isn't owned by an individual, somewhere where you're just turning up and fishing, you will need a carte de pêche. It's like a fishing card or fishing license. You can buy these from the Carte de Pêche website. I'll put a link in the description. But you only need to go on that site and buy a license if you're fishing public water. Private places, places you've booked, places you've paid to fish on private land, you will not need a license, and you only have to follow the rules of the fishery itself. Before I forget, it's also worth trying your best to work out the night fishing regulations if you choose to fish on a public water. Some of these big reservoirs and rivers, France has got some funny rules about where you can and can't night fish, certain zones which are permitted and certain ones that aren't. Sometimes there's signage, sometimes there isn't, but be prepared to be kicked off the spot or told that you can't camp in certain zones. Just be polite and do the best you can to follow the local rules. So how exactly do you choose where you're going to fish? It's easy to go on Google Maps and look at little bits of blue, but how do you know that there's carp in them, and how do you know that they're going to be good places to go and break your personal best? Well, if you're an experienced angler and you're choosing to fish public water, it's probably going to be word of mouth. It's probably going to be people on the ground talking to anglers, going into tackle shops, visiting forums, interacting with other anglers on social media. It doesn't hurt to ask people for advice or for tips or for spots, but be prepared that some people won't want to share their secret locations with you. With public lakes, it's a free-for-all. You know, you've got to be mindful that some people will want to keep those spots to themselves and might not want to give you all the information. However, on the contrary, if you are maybe newer to fishing and this is your first time in France and you're fishing a commercial venue, there are so many websites online dedicated to helping find you the right place to fish. Off the top of my head, I know there's Angling Lines, which is like a carp fishing holiday company. Go on their website, they've got loads of lakes. There's the Carp Specialist. I've done plenty of trips to venues that they have on their website. And this place, this was listed on Swimbooker. You can scroll through their whole website and you'll see loads of nice places that you can book up in France. And I would definitely say for your first trip to France, if you want some comfort, you want to have a good time, you want to stack the odds in your favour of catching that PB, booking up a lake in that manner is going to give you the best chance of success. Because on the ground when you arrive, there's probably people who speak English and can help you out. Because on the website, you'll be able to know how big the fish go, you know, what tackle you're going to need to take on that venue. You're probably going to be able to get in touch with a bailiff on the ground to ask, do I need 12-foot rods? You know, do I need little rods? Am I boat fishing? What strength of line do I need? Is there snags? Is there weed? And it's that prior information that starts to stack the odds in your favour and starts to make you much more likely to have a successful time. When I'm on these websites and I'm looking at cool places to go and fish in France, the deciding factor of where you go has a lot to do with cost. Some places are really expensive. Normally it's the places with really big fish and quite luxurious accommodation. Places like this are going to cost you a little bit more than potentially more wild, overgrown places that aren't managed so much and that haven't got such large carp in them. You've got to decide, you know, what fits your budget. Then you've got to think, well, what size of fish do I want to catch? I know this sounds crazy, but I would actually suggest not going in at the deep end and fishing somewhere for absolute beasts off the bat. There's a real satisfaction to building up and starting somewhere that's within your comfort zone or maybe just outside your comfort zone and sort of easing in. It gives you space to sort of improve your personal best over time and hone your skills and really enjoy it, rather than just sort of dropping on somewhere, catching one absolute beast and maybe feeling out of your depth, you know, and not really knowing what to do about it all. I'm certainly grateful of the times where I've broken my PBs sort of a pound or two at a time, taking on gradually more challenging venues and learning on the job. The other thing I would consider is how far it is from home. Normally you can look on Google Maps and work out like how long is it actually going to take to get to the place, because I don't mind the long drive. I quite like traveling 6-7 hours down to the south of France to fish interesting places, but maybe that's worth considering, you know, booking somewhere up that's closer to Calais so that you don't have such a long drive on your hands. Once you've found somewhere you like, the best thing you can do is try and find people who've been there, either through, you know, social media or reading reviews sometimes on the website. From that, you can get an idea of what the catch report looks like, what types of fishing you're going to be needing to do, and it's well worth researching as much as possible about the place before you go and book it up. I've been guilty of seeing a really cool place online, finding an availability, booking it up, and then finding out, oh, all the fishing is at ultra long range. And this was back at a time where I wasn't very good at casting. That trip wasn't so good for me because it was a very large lake where most of the fish lived in the middle. If I had have just read the review that said all of my fish came at 30 wraps, you know, like 100 meters or more out into the middle of the lake, I might have not gone there and chosen somewhere that was smaller, which, you know, I could cast more easily at. It sounds simple, but reading a few reviews, familiarizing yourself with the type of angling to expect will help you have a good time. Now, this one's really obvious, but you don't want to forget things I might need for my tackle box or food that I want to get. But I'll also make a list that I will only tick the items off once they're put inside my van. So I 100% know I've got them on me. Such items include my head torch, some spare batteries. In fact, spare batteries are a big one because I regularly don't think of batteries being important, but then when your bite alarm runs out and you're down to 2 rods, that's annoying. So pack some batteries for your alarms, your cameras, or your head torch. Spare line for your reels. That doesn't sound like something you're gonna need, but I've had experiences where I've had a fish take me through a snag, snap my line, or got in a big tangle, and I've had to cut the line off of the reel, and I've no longer got a fully spooled reel. So bringing a spare bulk spool of line is worth doing. A mosquito spray or citronella candles, that's a handy thing to have. Some lakes in France have got quite a lot of mozzies, especially in the summer. Also on my list, like enough leads, rig components, just in case you have a really good trip and you go through a load of hooks or you need to tie more rigs. It doesn't hurt to have a couple of extra packs of a few things like that. Then of course there's comfort, food and clothing. I'm the kind of person that tends not to think very much about those things. You know, I'm wearing my mate Tom's coat because I tend to just not think that it's going to be cold. What if it rains? You need waterproofs. What if it's boiling hot? Have you got your nice warm weather gear? Don't trust the forecast because it's wrong so much of the time. France is such a big place. I've never found a forecast that's 100% accurate. And then when it comes to food, yeah, I mean, some fisheries, if you're lucky, will have some kind of like food package. I know when I used to fish at Gigantica, I've been there twice, they've brought food to my fishing spot. Like, I've had to pay a bit extra, but, you know, they cook you meals. Other places, you're going to have to be more organised and have things to get you through the week. Supermarkets out in France are pretty flipping good. Like, there's loads of choice and it's not too different from the food you'll get back home. Yes, you'll see snails and maybe some frogs. I haven't actually seen frogs' legs, forget that. But the food's good out here and it's also quite cheap compared to back home. So what I like to do a lot of the time is actually drive down to the lake and on the first day of the trip, go to a French shop, get some lovely French bread, some meat, some wine, some champagne. No, I'm joking about the last two, but you know, you want to stock up and have a good week and eat well and live it up because you're on holiday. Whilst loading up and getting your gear ready, there is of course the topic of bait. You've got three options. Bring it with you from home, buy it from a tackle shop once you're in France. These can sometimes be a bit hit or miss. It's just like shops back home, you know, you get small ones, you get big ones. Some might not have what you want. Some will have some great deals. And then third option is to actually just buy your bait from the place you're fishing. If they offer that service and the prices don't look too bad, it's actually kind of worth doing. Saves you a load of weight in your vehicle as you're driving down, and it means you can buy the amount you want to actually use rather than bringing loads and ending up wasting any. Since the whole Brexit debacle, there have been some new laws or rules brought in, however they seem quite lax, which involve the export of food and animal products across the border into France. Everyone I know has brought bait in and out of France to go fishing with, and they've been absolutely fine, never had an issue. However, I have heard of stories of some people having boilies specifically confiscated at the crossing because they contain milk proteins or something, and apparently that's taxable or you have to pay some kind of export duties. It's almost always perfectly fine. I've been fine, but I need to mention that in this video. The one issue with bringing your own bait is you don't necessarily know how much you're going to use, and you kind of don't want to end up running out, but you also don't want to have too much. A big part of this is prior research, talking to bailiffs or local anglers or people who fish the place that you're going to and asking them, you know, did you need much bait? Normally on big lakes with lots of carp, you're going to need to feed more food to hold them in the area you're fishing. However, if it's a smaller lake, it's more likely you're just going to put small amounts of bait out and set little traps and stuff. It tends to be these bigger, higher stock waters with loads of carp in where heavy feeding is rewarding. On a lot of places, putting out lots of bait actually reduces your chances of getting bites. My personal choice is to bring around about the amount I expect to use and then bring some dry stuff. So some pellets that I can bring home. If I don't use it, it doesn't matter. Or some shelf life boilies that won't go moldy. If I don't use them, it's fine. It's good to have them though. All baits will work out in France. I don't think there's anything that carp won't eat at some point throughout the year, but particles like maize, tiger nuts, hemp seed, they're all quite cheap. You can get a lot of that for a good price, and it means you can bulk out your boilies and feed more if you need to. However, I know some people want to go for a big fish method and specifically target very large carp, and often it's quite rewarding to bait with boilies when you're doing so. However, it's all going to be down to the venue. I've fished at places in France where little handfuls of hemp seed and a ball of maggots gets you the most bites. But I've also fished places in France where you've got to put out 5 kilos or more of boilies in a big spread and fish 3 rods over the top of it if you're going to catch the big uns. Just do your research and plan accordingly. I mentioned earlier that I like to use the Eurotunnel to get into France. It's very quick, quite convenient. However, it is somewhat more expensive than using a ferry. The ferries sometimes go from like different ports, so do your research and go on Google Maps or something to work out your route to the lake you're going to. But the ferry can be a great option if you're not in a hurry and you'd like to save some money. Once you arrive in France, you'll notice a few cultural differences. First one, driving. They drive on the right-hand side of the road and the speed limits are done in kilometers per hour rather than miles an hour. Pretty easy to switch your speedometer over if it's digital or just look at the little thing. It's not as bad as people think driving on the other side of the road. It takes a small amount of getting used to and a little reminder when you get to a roundabout. Look left rather than looking right. But once you're an hour into the drive, you're in. You just somehow just bed in and get used to it. Don't be like my dad though and forget halfway and start driving on the left. Remember, drive on the right. The other thing you might notice is that the electric sockets are different. So if you do need to stop somewhere and charge something up, you will probably be needing a travel adapter, which goes from 2-pin to the UK style 3-pin. It's worth having one on you just in case. When it comes to rigs and tactics, there aren't really that many differences between fishing in England and fishing in France. Okay, the carp are bigger in a lot of these places, but they're still carp. They're still the exact same species. They feed in the same way. They like to eat the same things. And my honest opinion is that you should take the rigs and tactics that you're most confident in using back home and just bring them to France. It's a myth that when you arrive in France, you suddenly have to use massive hooks and, you know, complicated tiger nut rigs or some kind of really different method. It's just carp fishing. And if you're confident in what you're doing, it will all come good. There are a few minor changes that I might make. For example, if you find out the lake you're fishing has got red signal crayfish in it, you might want to bring some plastic hook baits or some shrink wrap to wrap around your boilies to make sure the crayfish don't steal your bait straight away. Some lakes in France do have quite a lot of crayfish, so it's worth being prepared, ready for that. The other thing, some French lakes have got a species called poisson chat, basically small catfish. They are unbelievably good at stealing bait again, so you will want to have something to protect that bait, something maybe hardened hook baits that are going to last longer. Other than that, the only real rig or tactical difference is because the carp are bigger, you might want to use stronger equipment. I don't mean you need to buy a whole new set of rods and reels, but maybe if you've got 10-pound line on your reels, you want to put some 15 on. If you're going somewhere weedy or snaggy or somewhere with absolute chunks in, like in excess of 60 pounds or more, you might be like, okay, I want some 18-pound line. You know, you don't want to lose them. So tackling up strong is worth doing. Maybe if you use size 10 hooks or size 8 hooks at home, you might want to size up to maybe a size 6 or a size 4, purely because the carp are bigger and the fight might be a bit stronger. Other than that though, stick with what you're confident in. Your rigs that you use back home will work in France. No need to overcomplicate it. On the topic of scaling things up, because France has some really big fish, you're probably going to need quite a big net, unhooking mat, and weigh sling. Many fisheries in France now provide nets, mats, slings on site, so you won't even need to bring any of that smelly stuff in the van with you. But if you have to bring your own, and the rules say that you must, or you're fishing a public venue where you just bring in everything that you need, my advice would definitely be 42-inch landing net. Anything smaller you might struggle getting a 40 or 50 pounder into, and weigh slings and unhooking mats. Just buy whatever the biggest your budget can afford. You just want to be ready for the best eventuality, which is that you catch a giant. So now you've arrived at the lake and it's time to start fishing. Well, normally on the day of arrival at the fishery, it will often be getting dark by the time you've settled in, unloaded your gear, been shown around or explored the venue, and you start getting rods ready. Sometimes I like to just fish a couple of single hook baits. I'll literally just put a pop-up on a rig and sling it out there if I've seen fish showing, or just explore the water with a little PVA bag or something for the first night. If you rush and you arrive in your spot and you panic and you start throwing bait everywhere, you start smashing the water to a foam with your marker float, you start, you know, baiting that spot up and then clipping up here and then casting in a tree. It's happened to me, trust me. You get all excited, you do all of that, and you end up kind of spooking the fish out of your area. The first morning is the morning of a trip where I always wake up early. You still got a little bit of energy. Yeah, you might have had a long drive, but you're excited. So wake up first thing. I mean, like before it gets light, sit by the water and just listen. It's first light when you're most likely to see carp jumping. I don't know why they love to jump in the morning, but they do. So that is going to be your best time to work out where the carp like to be. Once you know the areas they like to be, you can carefully find spots and start introducing some bait and setting your traps and casting your rigs out. Sometimes the single hook baits the first night will go off, and that will give you the information you need. Sometimes they won't, and you'll need to listen and watch the water and use your watercraft to work out how the trip's gonna go and work out where you need to fish. I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't arrive and put all your eggs in one basket and put out a shed load of bait until you kind of have settled in and worked out the lay of the land. So now you're 2-3 days into the session, and if you're catching, good for you. That's what we all like to hear. If you're not, that's where being patient and sticking to your guns is important. Unless you're seeing fish somewhere else, you're probably best off sticking where you are and having patience, leaving those rods uninterrupted and giving the carp the chance to, you know, gain their confidence and start feeding on your bait. Of course, on some lakes, you'll quickly notice that someone in a certain area is catching a lot more than you, or that you want to move swims. On some places you're able to do that, on other places you can't. It kind of depends on how busy the lake is and what the rules are. I have though, on a couple of occasions, struggled the first 2, 3, even 4 days of a trip. Both of my trips to Gigantica, I started out looking like I was gonna blank. Other people on the lake were catching loads and I wasn't catching anything. However, on both of those trips, near the end, having been very patient and waited carefully, and it came good on both those trips. I caught a 50 pounder the first time and I caught a 60 pounder on the main lake the second time. And I think sometimes the small fish swim around in a shoal. They like to be together. But the really big ones will often go around on their own. So just because you're not getting loads of bites doesn't mean that there isn't a really big fish in the area. Of course, if all the signs are saying that there's carp crashing out somewhere else on the lake, move on them, reposition a rod on them if you can. But if not, don't worry, try to have a good time even though you really want to catch. Relax, be patient, because at any moment, the fish of your dreams could take the bait. It's happened to me twice, so it's worth being patient. This week at this particular lake, I haven't actually needed to use very much bait. I've actually got a couple of bags of maize up there that I'm not even going to use. They are going to be wasted. That's probably going in the bin at the end of the session. I know that sounds bad, but I could have dumped it all in on the first day and killed my swim, given them far too much food, spooked them off of the area, or just reduced the chances of them finding my hook bait. It's interesting though, because every venue is different. And one time I was fishing a lake where actually I wasn't catching anything until I started feeding really heavily. Like, I needed to put in a massive bed of bait to stop the carp in the area and to get them feeding on my spot. Little handfuls here and there, the fish were just ignoring it and swimming straight over the top. But yeah, personal thoughts is little bit at the beginning and build up if you think there's fish around and if you're getting any action. There's nowhere in Europe which I wouldn't want to fish. In fact, I love fishing anywhere I am, all over the world, but France holds a special place in my heart because I've broken PBs here, I've made friendships here, I've met new anglers here, and in general just had a wonderful time carp fishing in this country. However, it's not all sunshine and roses. You aren't guaranteed to catch. You're never guaranteed to catch. So my last tip, my last piece of advice is manage your expectations. Yes, there's a chance of a real big one, and I sincerely hope that you break your personal best. But if you don't, there's always another trip and there's always another time. At the end of the day, it's fishing. Just go out there, enjoy it. And thanks for watching. See you next time on Fishing Tutorials.